The mechanic quietly placed a clamp on my palm. In the footage from the garage, my son's hands were shaking just as much as mine. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. I'm 66, a retired high school English teacher with a stubborn streak and a fondness for strong coffee. I raised my son mostly on my own after his father passed, and I'll tell you, I used to think I'd done a pretty good job. I taught him to tie his shoes with a triple knot, how to apologize without the word but, and why a lie is like a loose thread, tug hard enough and the whole sweater comes apart. I also taught him how to drive in the old church parking lot on Sundays because the lines were big and forgiving, and the minister wasn't picky about skid marks if you left a note on his windshield. So when the letter arrived from the DMV, revocation of driving privileges effective immediately, I felt like someone had reached into my chest and pinched my heart between two fingers. The wording was cold as a steel filing cabinet. Too many incidents, it said. Too many complaints from concerned members of the community. An insurance note was stapled to the back like an afterthought. My premium was tripling. At my age, the last thing I needed was to be told I was suddenly reckless, incompetent, and expensive. I'd had one fender bender last winter, black ice, a bump into a parking lot light post that left a scrape on my bumper and a bruise on my pride. But that was it. I'd passed my last vision test, I wore my progressive lenses, and I still knew all 4 verses to American Pie, which is more than I can say for the kids at the 4th of July picnic. My son Mark showed up at my house the same afternoon the letter came. He had a grocery store bouquet and his concerned face on, the one with the pinched eyebrow and the lips pressed thin. "Mom," he said, "maybe this is for the best. You've been, a little distracted lately." "Distracted?" I said, setting the letter on the counter like it might bite. "I am not distracted. I am angry." He patted my arm. The bouquet's plastic crackled. "I'll help you out. We can look into a ride service, and I can take you to church and the doctor." And I told him I would be fine. I told him I would appeal. He told me the system is confusing and that he'll take care of it. He insisted on collecting my keys just until it's sorted, like I was a teenager who'd missed curfew. I let him. That was my first mistake. I'm old enough to know better than to hand over my independence without a receipt. The week after, my house started shrinking around me. I learned the bus schedule like a poem. The 7:20 to the library, the 9:05 that was always 10 minutes late. The first time I stood at the stop with my tote bag and my cane, decorative, don't start, a boy I used to teach zipped past in his pickup and waved like I was part of the scenery. I checked my watch and thought about comfort at my age, not cashmere or orthopedic shoes, but the simple ability to decide when to come and go. Autonomy is a quiet luxury until it's gone. A few days into my new bus life, I found a note tucked under my doormat like a bad penny. "Your driving has been scaring people." No signature, just a shaky felt-tip scrawl. I sat on the step, the paper tremoring in my hands. I knew the neighbor ladies. If I'd scared any of them, they would have told me to my face and handed me a slice of banana bread as a chaser. This felt orchestrated. Bullying, but polite. I called the DMV that afternoon. The woman at the desk sounded younger than my coffee pot. "You have the right to appeal. We can mail you the forms," she said, reading from a script. "Mail them," I said, and wrote down her name out of sheer habit. Names matter. Names are where you tug the sweater. Mark insisted on driving me to the mechanic the next day to get the car stored for safety. We went to a shop he knew, not the one I'd been using for years. "They're cheaper," he said, and I said nothing because I wanted my car back, and I still believed my son was on my side. The garage smelled like a gym bag left in July. The man at the counter had grease tattoos on his knuckles and a nervous twitch in his jaw. Mark talked to him out of earshot. I stood by the rack of stale granola bars and wondered why those bars always look like they've been there since the Reagan administration.
When Mark waved me over, he had that same thin-lipped concern. "They'll hold on to it while the paperwork's sorted," he said. "We don't want liability." "Liability for what?" I said, breathing too loudly. The mechanic kept his eyes on the mouse pad. "Ma'am," he said, "we'll keep it safe." On the way home, Mark brought up assisted living, a cute place with bingo on Tuesdays. I stared through the windshield, his windshield, my car, and counted silently. When I got to 30, I said, "Do not mistake my patience for weakness." He laughed like it was a joke he didn't get and turned up the radio. 2 days later, the mechanic called me direct. Not Mark. Me. "Mrs. Holloway?" he said. His voice had a hitch in it, like a bad belt on a vacuum. "Could you swing by without your son?" That's when he gave me the clamp. Small, metal, like something you'd use to pinch off a vein in a hospital show. He slipped it into my hand across the counter the way the school nurse used to pass me a couple Tylenol during flu season. He nodded toward the back. He said, "I think you ought to see something." We stood in the bay where my car sat like a dog in trouble. He clicked a keyboard and pulled up grainy black and white footage from the corner camera. The date stamp was yesterday. In the video, a man in a hooded sweatshirt moved like he wanted to be invisible. He wasn't. He slid under the front bumper and made a precise motion with his hands. The camera caught his face twice, profile and then full on. My son. My boy. His hands were shaking, fast little jerks like a hummingbird caught in a jar. "If I hadn't seen the fluid on the floor, you'd have driven that car," the mechanic said. "I put the clamp on the cut so it wouldn't drain. That's your brake line." I gripped the counter until the world stopped tilting. I did not cry. I have cried maybe twice in the last 10 years my husband's been gone, and this was not going to be number 3. "Are you sure?" I said, even though my eyes were already telling me what my heart didn't want to hear. He swallowed. "There were some calls from your son before you came in the first time. He asked about, disabling, making sure a senior would fail a safety check. I didn't agree to nothing like that. But he must have come in the side door when the boys were out on a smoke break. We don't usually lock it." His thumb worried at a grease spot on his sleeve. "I took the liberty of saving the footage to a flash drive. I think you ought to have it." I slid the clamp into my purse like a keepsake from a bad marriage and said, "Let me pay you." He shook his head. "Pay me when your car leaves with someone honest behind the wheel." On the bus home, my tote bag thudded against my shin, and the clamp tapped out a rhythm with my keys, metal on metal. It might have been a hymn. I thought about all the explanations I could manufacture for my son. Sheer stupidity, misguided concern, a panic attack. But the face I kept seeing wasn't the huddled shape under my car. It was Mark standing in my kitchen 2 weeks earlier, pinching his lips thin and telling me he would take care of it. I've been teaching kids to spot theme since Nixon. The theme here was control. I don't move fast, but I move deliberately. I called my friend Linda from church. She's a retired nurse with more common sense than a cornfield, and asked if she could swing by. She arrived with coffee and cookies because that's what women our age bring to a crisis. I showed her the clamp and the flash drive. I didn't narrate my feelings. Feelings were implied. She watched the footage twice and sat back. "Honey," she said, "that's a crime." "I am aware," I said. "And that boy is your son." "I am aware of that, too." "You called the police yet?" "No," I said. "I called you." She nodded like that made sense. "Then we're going to do this the right way. We get a lawyer, we gather everything, and we treat him like any other man who did what he did." We called a lawyer named Danner, Louise, a woman with silver hair and sensible shoes, who'd handled Linda's late husband's estate. Her receptionist squeezed me in that same afternoon. When we got there, Louise listened with her steepled fingers under her chin. She didn't interrupt me, and she didn't make the face. You know the face. The, how do I tell this woman her baby is a snake face? First, we secure your documents. Do you have a power of attorney on file? Yes, I said. It's Mark. It's been Mark since my hip surgery 5 years ago.
Then we revoke it, she said, efficient as a paper cutter. Today. We also file a petition to challenge the license revocation with the department. We'll request the underlying complaints and evidence. I want to see dates, times, IP addresses, everything. If your son made false reports, that's one problem. If he tampered with your vehicle, that's another, and it's criminal. We will also talk to the police, but I'd like to walk in with more than just a video and a clamp. Bless you, I said, and meant it. Louise shot off emails like a one-woman newsroom. She had a paralegal print forms for revoking the POA. A notary popped in with a stamp the size of a coaster, and by the time I finished my second cup of waiting room coffee, I was legally my own woman again. Back home, I pulled out a binder. I am a teacher. I make binders. I divided it into sections: DMV, insurance, mechanic, Mark. It felt both ridiculous and necessary. I taped the clamp into a plastic bag, like a butterfly in a science exhibit. I labeled the flash drive Vid Evidence with a black Sharpie and told myself I was not the kind of woman who puts off hard things until they're easier. The DMV sent the complaint file in a fat envelope 3 days later. The cover letter said it could take up to 2 weeks. Louise said sometimes it takes 2 months. I figured somebody in that office still remembered being taught by me, because it rolled in like a blessing. I opened it at the kitchen table with a steak knife and laid out each page like a surgeon. Complaint forms, times, allegations, some anonymous, some with names that sounded made up. Most were typed and printed at home. The fonts varied, the phrases repeated. Swerved toward a mailbox, ran a stop sign on Brookdale, backed into a hydrant outside the post office. I could tell you where I was on each of those dates because widows keep calendars, and because a small town is a chorus. You can hear yourself in other people's schedules. On the hydrant day, I was at the dentist with my mouth draped in a paper bib. On the mailbox day, I'd been at Quilt Guild from noon to 3, and we'd taken a group photo with a clock on the wall behind us. I printed the photo. I photocopied my dental receipt. I stapled to my heart a reminder. There's what they say, and there's what you can prove. Louise's office traced the IP addresses on 2 of the emailed complaints to a co-working space downtown, where Mark had been renting a desk for his startup, a thing that mostly existed in his mouth and on his LinkedIn. Another was a public library computer, sloppy but convenient, and one came from a phone hotspot. Not definitive, not yet, but suspicious like a screen door in a hurricane. Insurance mailed a notice that my son had called as my authorized representative to report several incidents and request a risk review. He wasn't my representative anymore. I highlighted the date and smiled at the neon paint. Gotcha, I said to the highlighter, and it's possible I'm getting weird in my solitude. Then there were the texts. After we revoked the POA, Mark started texting like a man trying to herd cats with a string. Mom, I need to talk to you now. Everything I did for your safety. You're embarrassing yourself. I love you. Why are you doing this? You can't handle this alone. I did not reply right away. I treated my phone like a courtroom. Anything I said could and would be used against me, so I let the silence do its work. Linda came over for spaghetti and said, "He's trying to keep you off balance." I spent 32 years teaching teenagers how to keep their balance. I'll be fine. We had a date for the DMZ appeal hearing. Louise told me to dress like myself and bring my binder and my spine. She said, Speak in facts, no adjectives unless they're from the complaint. In the meantime, I went back to the mechanic. He looked like a man who wanted to bury himself in a tool chest and close the lid. "I'm sorry," he said before I could even open my mouth. I should have done something sooner. Your boy came in here like a tidal wave, and I thought I could mind my own business. My wife said, "That's someone's mother," and I couldn't sleep. "You did the right thing," I said. I meant it. I've seen enough people do the wrong thing and then justify it with a language I don't speak. He handed me a second flash drive. "This is the phone recording of him calling. I back up calls for billing. Don't tell anyone that." He smirked. "And this is the footage from the day he came in alone. There's also a log of who is in the shop when. We keep a clipboard, old-fashioned."
Old-fashioned keeps people honest, I said, slipping the drives into my purse. My purse was starting to feel like a crime lab. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The night before the hearing, I slept like a cat on a radiator, warm but alert. At 3 a.m., I got up and baked banana bread, because sometimes the only power we have is to make the kitchen smell like love. I bagged a slice for Louise and one for the mechanic, and I put on my navy blazer and the pearls my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary. I looked like a woman who had receipts. We arrived at the DMV building, all fluorescent lighting and linoleum, the kind of place that makes you doubt your own signature. The hearing officer was a woman, maybe 45, with a careful haircut and a stack of files as high as hope. She read the rules. Louise smiled and waited for her opening like a good chess player waits for a blunder. "We'd like to start with Exhibit A," Louise said, sliding the flash drive across the table. "Video from the mechanic's security camera." The hearing officer put on the footage. The image flickered and then stabilized. There was my son, like a ghost I still claimed, crouching under my car with a tool in his trembling hand. The room got very quiet. It's funny how silence changes in shape depending on what it contains. This silence was a brick. "Exhibit B," Louise said. "Call recordings from the same garage in which Mr. Holloway asked whether a senior safety inspection could be arranged to ensure a failure." The officer listened. She made a note. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something that wasn't skepticism in her eyes. It was sorrow, or maybe respect. Louise went on. "Exhibits C through G, complaint letters, many of which share identical phrasing and underlying IP data tracing to a co-working space used by Mr. Holloway. Exhibit H, Mrs. Holloway's dental appointment receipt for the date she allegedly backed into a hydrant. And Exhibit I, a photo of her at a quilting guild during the hour she allegedly ran a stop sign on Brookdale." The officer tapped her pen. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, "do you have anything you want to say?" "Yes," I said. "I am not a woman of few words, but I chose them like jewelry. I have driven safely for 50 years. I made one mistake last winter. Someone wanted me out of the driver's seat for reasons that were not my safety. I will accept any refresher course you think I should take, but I won't accept being bullied out of my life." The officer excused us so she could deliberate. We sat in a hallway the color of oatmeal. Louise took the banana bread and said, "You're formidable." I said, "I am hungry." We both laughed. It felt like loosening a tight dress after a long dinner. When we were called back in, the officer spoke plain. "Pending completion of a driving evaluation with an independent instructor, your license is reinstated. The complaint file will be referred to the appropriate authorities for potential fraud." I exhaled so hard my glasses fogged. Louise squeezed my hand. I wanted to send a group text to every student who ever told me the truth doesn't matter. It matters. It just needs a good attorney and a stubborn woman. We stepped out into the parking lot and the world felt 5 degrees brighter. That lasted exactly 30 seconds because my phone started buzzing in my purse like a trapped wasp. Mark. I let it buzz. It stopped, It buzzed again, then a text. "We need to talk." Louise looked at me. "You don't owe him anything." "I owe myself a plan," I said. The plan took shape over coffee at Linda's kitchen table, the war room, we call it, because she's got a lazy Susan that spins like a record and we stick post-it notes on it until the whole thing looks like a sunflower made of evidence. We listed everything Mark had done that we could prove and what it meant. Vehicle tampering, a felony, filing false reports, impersonation while acting as my representative with the insurance company post-POA. That one made Louise's eyebrows jump. Elder abuse, per our state laws, not a term I loved, but a statute I could use, and attempted coercion into assisted living for financial gain. Trickier, but circumstantial evidence builds like Legos.
Here's where the good part of getting older kicks in. You accumulate people. Students, colleagues, friends from the choir, neighbors who owe you for the time you brought their garbage cans in during a storm. We started making calls. Not the gossipy kind, the "would you mind emailing me that photo" kind. The Quilting Guild sent me the original file with metadata. The church office printed a log showing I was at the Altar Guild meeting on the school bus incident day. The librarian remembered a man using the public computer to send emails complaining about a dangerous driver. And while privacy rules kept her from naming him, the camera in the foyer saw who walked in and out that hour. When she heard my voice shake, she gently suggested I have the police requested. People like to do the right thing if you give them precise instructions and a reason. Louise arranged a meeting with a detective who handled elder abuse and family fraud. He was the kind of man who'd look at a broken thing and decide how to fix it before asking who broke it. He watched the footage twice and whistled through his teeth. "Open and shut on the tampering," he said. "The rest is a stack-up. You've done a lot of my work for me." "I taught research papers for 3 decades, I said. "Footnotes are my love language." He chuckled. "We'll need one more thing before we move on him." He slid a manila folder toward me. "A statement, in your words." So I wrote. I wrote like I was grading my own heart, and I gave myself an A for clarity. I didn't use adjectives, just verbs and dates, and the sentence that hurt me to see in my own handwriting. I believe my son intended to harm me, or at least to terrify me into surrendering control of my life and assets. We had our case, but I wanted something else. Something only a mother thinks to want. I wanted the truth to reveal itself to him, not as a gavel dropping, but as a mirror. I wanted him to see what he'd become in a way that would stick, and I wanted it to be clean, legal, documented, done in daylight. We set a meeting at my house. I told him I wanted to talk about next steps and that I had banana bread. He came. Of course he came. He smelled money, and he smelled the chance to keep steering me. I had the detective in the den with the door closed, per the warrant, Louise at the kitchen island, Linda at the table with a notebook, and a tiny body cam clipped inside the bow of the apron my granddaughter had given me, blue and white checks. Cheerful, like a lie. The camera was legal. The recording was legal. The situation was mine. Mark walked in with that bouquet again, as if flowers could be spackle for this kind of crack. "You look great," he said. I was worried. "I'm fine," I said. "Sit. Eat." He took a bite, he always eats when he's nervous, and smiled. Wide. "So," he said, "have you thought more about that cute place? I can book as a tour." "I have thought more about why you cut my brake line." He swallowed wrong. The color slid out of his face. "What?" Louise turned the laptop around and hit play. The footage bloomed on the screen, my son, in black and white, caught in the act like a child with marker on his hands. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. "Mom," he said, "I can explain." "Don't. I taught you not to lie." "This isn't—" "I taught you better," I said, and set the clamp on the table between us like a judge sets down a gavel. "And this is what you did."
He raised his hands, cutting down all explanations with a chopping motion. I was trying to protect you. You're not safe out there. You could hurt someone. This is me protecting you from yourself. By cutting my brake line? That's not protection. That's cruelty in a Halloween costume. He looked to the left, to the right, for an exit that would let him keep his pride. You set me up, he said. This is entrapment. This is consequences, I said. He pushed away from the table so hard that the chair legs squealed on the linoleum. The sound made my teeth itch. I love you, he said, angry like a door slam. I love you more than you'll ever know. I hope someday you love yourself enough to tell the truth, because the truth is knocking. Louise nodded once. The den door opened. The detective stepped out with the paperwork and the voice you use on combustible materials. Mark Holloway? We need to talk. I expected a fight. I expected him to bluster. Instead, he crumpled like someone had let the air out. Mom, please, he said. I am your mother, and I am also a person who deserves to live. Then I stood up, because I wanted him to have to look up at me for once. Age gives you a back that aches, but it also gives you a presence when you decide to use it.
The detective read him his rights. The body cam blinked its patient little light. Linda wrote a note to herself that looked like a prayer. Louise packed the laptop with the precision of a surgeon restoring organs in the right order. We walked out to the porch while they finished, because I needed air that didn't know my child had cut it. On the porch, the late afternoon sun was butter on the railing. I thought about the first time I put a Band-Aid on his skinned knee and said, "It won't hurt forever." I thought about the last time he borrowed my car and came back with a full tank and a smile. Timeline, facts, memory. The only way to survive is to let them coexist without letting one cancel the other. The detective took him in without cuffs. I was grateful for that. I am not a monster. I do not want to see my child in chains. I just want him not to hurt me. That night, my house was quiet like a library after closing. I poured myself a finger of the good bourbon my husband used to keep for holidays and sat with the binder. I made a new tab, After. In it, I put a sheet of paper that said, "What I want next," and I started a list. Safety, autonomy, accountability, no more secrets. In the morning, Louise called with updates. She booked him on tampering and fraud, she said. He'll be arraigned Monday. The DA is interested in the Cattern. You had your license reinstated, and the insurance has been alerted to remove the black mark. There's also the matter of the power of attorney he used after revocation. That's a separate count. I breathed in like oxygen could fix the parts of me no medicine could reach. Thank you, I said. There's one more thing, she said. He's asking to talk to you. No, I said. Then I remembered all those years I told students to use their words. Not yet. 2 days later, I got a call. Not from Mark, but from a woman named Tessa. Was his fiancée, she said in a voice that had lost a shoe. I think I might be in trouble too. She told me about the co-working space, the complaints, and the app he used to spoof phone numbers. She told me he'd asked her to sign as a witness on some documents she didn't understand, and that she wished she'd read. She told me she'd been scared to say no, which is a feeling I understand in my bones, but don't respect anymore. Do you have evidence? I said, gentle and firm. I have emails, she said, and a notebook he left at my place. Bring them to Louise, I said. Tell her I sent you. I hung up and added, no more leashes disguised as hand-holding to my after list. I am too old for performances. On Sunday, Pastor Jim prayed for families in crisis without names. After the service, a line formed in front of me, like I was the dessert table. Women and men I'd known for years, pressing my hand, saying, "We love you," the way you say "good job" to a child who finally ties his shoes without help. One of my former students, now a traffic cop, said, "Ma'am, if you need someone to follow you to the grocery store in the meantime, I'm your guy." I told him I could handle a grocery run and that I appreciated the offer anyway.
On Monday, I drove myself to the evaluation with the independent instructor. Oh, how sweet to put the key in the ignition and feel the engine turn like a purr. I signaled at every corner like a model in a runway show. I did the parallel park like I invented it. The instructor, a woman my age with a name tag that said Loretta, checked boxes and finally said, "You're fine. Better than fine." She grinned. "You drive like my mother, cautious where it counts and spicy where it doesn't." I laughed, and my laugh sounded like the weather turning. Free. By Thursday, the DA had a fuller picture thanks to Tessa's notebook. There were outlines and lists, and I recognized his handwriting. My son's neat block letters from 3rd grade all grown up into schemes. Phase 1, complaints. Phase 2, revoke. Phase 3, evaluate assets. There was a line that made my stomach flip. If she won't move willingly, force the issue. Safety incident. That phrase, safety incident, would become the hinge on which the case swung. I told Louise I wanted to pursue a civil order as well. No contact, no access to my accounts, no stepping foot on my property without permission. She nodded and filed it. "This is the social part of justice," she said. "Boundaries you can see." We got a court date for the protective order. Tessa agreed to testify if needed. The mechanic agreed to testify. Even Pastor Jim said he'd stand there and say, under oath, that I was in my pew every Sunday I allegedly tore through town like a teenager in a borrowed Camaro. We had more than enough. We had a chorus. The morning of the hearing, I adjusted my pearls and thought about the boy I raised, the man he became, and the woman I still am. Justice doesn't mean you stop loving someone. It means you stop loving the fantasy they sold you and start loving the truth enough to live in it. And that, my friends, is when I realized the apple hadn't just fallen far from the tree. It had rolled down the hill, crossed the road, and joined a different orchard. The best thing I could do for both of us was to let it stay there.
The courthouse smelled like pencils sharpened to nubs and cold air from vents that never quit. I wore the same navy blazer because I'm old-fashioned enough to believe in lucky clothes, and because I wanted the judge to see continuity. The same woman who walked in with a binder at DMV was going to keep walking in with a binder until the truth finished its lap. Louise met me at the security line with a smile and 2 pens. "Judges love clean exhibits," she said, handing me one like a baton. "We'll keep this tight." Mark arrived 5 minutes later in a suit I didn't recognize. Charcoal, slim cut, the kind favored by men who take advice from magazines. He had a new lawyer, too, a slick one with hair that didn't move. They sat across from us and didn't look over. That was fine. My world had narrowed to a circle that included my breath, my pulse, and the feel of paper tabs under my thumb. When our case was called, I stood straight and said my name. Funny how much power it has, speaking your own name like you own it. The judge glanced at the motion for a civil protective order, my affidavit, the exhibits. He asked if we had additional testimony. We did. Louise walked the court through the basics. Revocation of my power of attorney months ago, attempted use of it afterward at the insurance company, the brake line video, the complaint IP trail, the notebook from Tessa with the words "safety incident" underlined twice. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. Mark's lawyer argued I was confused, that I had misinterpreted my son's misguided attempts at care. He spoke in velvet, and you could almost see the bow he imagined tying on the story. When he mentioned my age, the judge's eyebrows lifted like theater curtains. Louise leaned in and whispered, "He's misreading the room." I kept my eyes forward. Then it was my turn. "Your Honor," I said, "I'm not confused. I'm angry. Those are different things. The facts are in the binder. I'm asking for a simple thing, distance." I told him I wanted no contact unless through counsel, no access to my property, no use of my old POA anywhere ever, no calls to my providers acting as my representative. And I wanted it all in writing so I could set it on my kitchen counter and see it when the house got quiet and doubt tried to tiptoe in. The judge granted the order for a year with the option to extend.
He told Mark that any violation would be treated with serious consequences. He said it in that clipped, all-business way a judge has, but I heard the subtext. You burn a bridge, you don't get to cross the river. We stepped into the hallway where the fluorescent lights hummed like bees. Louise shook my hand. "One fence up," she said. "One fence I can see," I said. "Good fences make good futures." On the way home, I stopped at the bank. I had already put fraud alerts on my credit, but the young woman at the desk, all eyeliner and empathy, helped me set up additional verification steps. She showed me how to require a secret phrase for any account change, and we picked one my son would never guess. The name of the librarian who taught me to shelve books in 6th grade. It made me smile to write it down. From there, I went to my insurance agent in person with a plate of banana bread. I'm not above bribery when it looks like dessert, and asked him to copy the page with the authorized representative log. He did, frowning at the dates. He was very persuasive on the phone, he said, embarrassed, said you were in the hospital. Persuasive is not the same as true, I said kindly. I'll take 3 copies. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote myself a letter I could open if I ever felt guilty. He made a plan that required you to be smaller. You chose to be what you are instead. I slipped it into the after tab with the other reminders. The VA's office called the next morning. The arraignment had been straightforward. Mark pled not guilty. The public narrative, as such as it was in our small town, sprang up fast and messy in the way gossip does. I didn't fan it, and I didn't fight it. I let the paperwork speak where it needed to. When someone cornered me in the grocery store to say, "I can't imagine," I said, "I couldn't either, but I can handle it." Then I picked up my butter and my eggs, and I went home. A week later, while I was labeling spice jars, a woman needs something to control that doesn't bite back. An envelope arrived from the clerk's office, thick as a Sunday paper. In it was a copy of a petition my son had filed 3 months earlier, before the break line, requesting a guardianship hearing. The language was clinical and sharp. It said, diminished capacity, inability to manage financial affairs. He had included a list of incidents that looked suspiciously like the DMV file. Same dates, same phrases. My hands went cold, then hot, then steady. He'd been building the box before he tried to set it on fire. I brought the petition to Louise. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She was laying the runway, she said.
The plane he planned to land carried my house, I said. We'll file our objection with exhibits, she said, already scribbling. We'll ask for a cognitive evaluation with a neutral geriatric psychologist, not some fly-by-night hired pen. And we'll ask the court to consider his conduct as proof of bad faith. I went to the evaluation grateful for decades of crossword puzzles and a life spent grading papers until midnight. The doctor asked me to draw a clock. I drew 2, one digital and one with Roman numerals, and he laughed. You don't have to show off. Can't help it, I said, and we both smiled. His report came back briskly. Intact cognition, high executive function, no evidence of impairment. He added a paragraph, unusual for such reports, about the stress of familial betrayal and the importance of autonomy to quality of life. I photocopied that paragraph for my refrigerator door beside the recipe for peach cobbler. The guardianship hearing turned into a seminar my students would have loved, how to build a case with footnotes. Louise submitted the report, the break line video, the order revoking the POA, Tessa's notebook, the insurance logs, the IP trace, and a tidy stack of affidavits from people who had me on those supposed incident days in places like the library board meeting and the church kitchen stirring chicken salad. The judge flipped pages, slow and grim. When he looked up, there was no softness in him. Petition denied, sanctions considered. He didn't pound a gavel. He didn't need to. We walked out into air so bright it felt bleached. Louise let out a breath she'd been holding for a month. I felt light and heavy at the same time. Light because the weight was moving. Heavy because you don't lose a son like this and not feel it in your bones. That's when Tessa called again. "There's more," she said. "I didn't think it mattered. I was wrong." She brought over a messenger bag that looked like it belonged to a grad student cramming for finals. Inside were 3 notebooks, a portable hard drive, and a folder labeled Mom in my son's block letters. Inside the folder was a printout of my mortgage statement, my life insurance policy summary, and a pre-filled application for a home equity line of credit with my name on it and his as consulting family member. The signature line was blank, but there were sticky flags where he wanted me to sign, and a note in the margin, "Use old POA if necessary." I sat very still. I have had moments in my life when rage showed up like a drunk at a potluck, loud, pushy, breaking things. This was not that. This was quiet. A full pot of coffee gone cold. I said, "Thank you for bringing this to Tessa." She said, "I'm sorry. I thought he was trying to build something. I think he was trying to build the kind of life where he didn't have to try anymore." "You left him," I said. She said, "I did. And I scheduled an appointment with a therapist. She stopped, tears choking off the rest. "You want yourself back," I said. "You'll get her, piece by piece." We gave the folder and the drive to Louise. The DA added attempted fraud to the list. The bank's fraud department, a woman named Leela, who sounded like she'd taught more than one son a lesson, flagged the attempted HELOC and sent me a letter on heavy paper apologizing for the scare. I put it behind the plastic in the binder and tapped it twice for luck. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. With the legal fences up, I turned to the social side, the part everyone pretends doesn't matter until it does. I didn't post a screed on Facebook. I didn't name names. I wrote a simple note in our neighborhood group. "If someone calls claiming to represent me, please ask for written proof. I'm fine, I'm driving, and my banana bread is still available upon request." The comments filled with hearts and "atta girls," and 3 separate women messaged me privately to say their sons had tried softer versions of the same power grab, taking keys, calling doctors behind their backs, treating their mothers like a problem to be solved. I shared Louise's name and the words I'd learned to use. Language is a ladder. You just have to know where to lean it. I also called the co-working space where Mark had been swanning around with his laptop and his pretensions. I didn't ask them to do anything. I just asked for a copy of their contract with him, the one I found in the notebook, and any logs showing access to their business mailing service. The young man at the desk said he couldn't give that to me without a subpoena. I thanked him and told the DA. 2 days later, a police officer in a crisp uniform picked up the records and returned them with a nod. The logs showed times and dates that walked hand in hand with the IP trace we already had. Building blocks, Lego by Lego.
Meanwhile, the mechanic, my unexpected ally, called to say someone had stopped by the shop asking questions about that old lady's car. The someone had a too bright smile and an identifying tattoo that the detective recognized from a social media page as a buddy of Mark's. I called Luis and the detective, and we agreed on a step I wish no one ever needed, a witness tampering warning. The detective delivered it with the same calm his mother probably appreciated when he called to say he was staying out late. At church the following Sunday, Pastor Jim asked if I'd like to say something at coffee hour about navigating complicated family storms. I did. I wrote a short talk the old-fashioned way, with index cards and bullet points. I never said the word son. I talked about power of attorney and how to revoke it, about putting contact passwords on your accounts, about trusting your instincts when someone says, "This is for your own good," and your stomach says, "This is for theirs." I gave out a one-page handout Luis helped me draft with plain language and phone numbers. 12 people took extras for a friend. I smiled. The best revenge sometimes looks a lot like a community education seminar with bad coffee and a plate of lemon bars. But make no mistake, I still wanted accountability that counted. The DA came to me with a plea offer conveyed by Mark's lawyer, reduced sentence on the tampering if he pled to the fraud, restitution to the mechanic for damages and security upgrades, a required course on elder abuse prevention — I didn't know those existed, apparently they do — and a no-contact order folded into the deal. I asked if it included an admission of guilt in writing. It did not. Then no, I said. Not unless he admits. Words matter. I'm a teacher. He doesn't get to slide past the sentence that says, I did it. Luis squeezed my arm. You negotiating? She asked, grinning. That's my girl. We countered. Written admission, restitution to me for legal costs, a public apology read in court, probation with community service, not just anywhere, but at the senior center, supervised, appropriate, no driving allowed, and enrollment in counseling with proof of attendance. The DA raised an eyebrow. You want to watch him mop floors? He asked. I want him to sweep up the mess he made in a room full of people who look like the person he tried to control, I said, and I want him to practice saying I'm sorry without but. Mark's lawyer balked. Mark balked. The DA shrugged. Then we go to trial. While we waited, life happened in the small ways that keep a woman human and not just a plaintiff. I planted autumn mums in the front yard, all burnt orange and wine red, stubborn little sons. I made chili for the church bazaar and won second place to Betty Pierce, as usual. I drove to the cemetery and sat with my husband, told him the story like he was dozing in his chair and I was talking just to keep him company. I told him I missed the feeling of having someone in the house who clanked around at odd hours. He never answered, but the wind did a rustle, and I took it as a hello. Then came the phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a collections officer for a credit card company I'd never used, asking why the card in my name hadn't been activated and whether I intended to pay the annual fee. My throat went cold. No, I said. I never applied. We went through the script. Report of identity theft, freeze, new fraud alerts. Another layer peeled back, and underneath was something sour. 2 more attempts at cards. One from a boutique bank that likes to market to influencers, and one from a store that sells televisions so big they could double as dining tables. Luis added identity theft to our criminal complaints and filed a civil suit for damages. She said, we'll keep the criminal and civil lanes clean, but we'll drive fast in both. That's when I got the letter from Mark. Not through me, through Luis. 5 pages, handwritten. His neat block script hitching only once when he wrote the word sorry. It was an apology without admissions, which is to say, a letter that reads like a shrug in cursive. He wrote, I was overwhelmed. I made mistakes. I want to make this right. Please help me. I carried the letter around for a day like a heavy coin. I read it in the morning and it sounded like remorse. I read it at night and it sounded like rehearsal. I slept on it and woke up with the line my husband used to say when a student tried to talk their way out of plagiarizing. The proof is in the paragraphs. There were no paragraphs where he said, I did this. There were paragraphs where he said, I wanted to protect you. A loop, not a ladder. I wrote back a single sentence through Luis. If you want to make it right, tell the truth.
A week later, the DA called. They'd found a paper trail I hadn't expected. Emails between Mark and a personal injury consultant he'd contacted, workshopped ideas with, and then ghosted. In one email, flagged by a keyword search from the warrant on his email account, he asked, if my mother had a minor accident proving she was unsafe, could that help with guardianship? The consultant, to their mild credit, replied, we do not advise causing or staging any incident. Mark hadn't replied, but the keyword accident now sat on my desk like a dead thing. The DA said it strengthened the theory that the brake line cut wasn't a panic move, it was a plan. He added that the consultant had forwarded the email to his supervisor with a no thanks, which, in a world that sometimes feels like everybody's on the make, was a mercy. The public apology became the line in the sand. 2 days before the pretrial conference, Mark's lawyer called with a new offer. Admission to the tampering and fraud, identity theft dropped of restitution made in full within 6 months, apology in court, community service at the senior center, probation, counseling. He would write an apology to the mechanic as well. I asked about the line in his letter where remorse should live. "He'll read exactly what we agree to," the lawyer said, "no hedging." I told them yes. The day of the plea, the courtroom felt smaller. Maybe I'd grown, or maybe the room had learned my outline. Mark stood, hands folded, and did not look at me. He read his statement. He said the words as if they were stones he had to hold in his mouth. "I cut the brake line. I made false reports. I impersonated my mother. I attempted to open credit in her name. My actions were dangerous and wrong." The words landed on the record with a thud I could feel in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't clap. I watched the judge accept the plea and outline the terms. I watched the gavel come down this time, a clean little pop like a jar ceiling. After, on the steps, the mechanic caught up with me, cap in hand. He said, "I got your banana bread," he said, shy. "We're putting in a new camera and a lock on the side door. On him." He nodded toward the courthouse. "It feels right." I said, "It does. Right is sometimes small. Small counts." That evening, the senior center director called to ask if I'd be willing to lead a short writing group while Mark fulfilled his service hours, completely separate from him, different days, different wing, because apparently once you brand yourself a woman with a binder, people think you can run a committee blindfolded. I said yes. I like rooms where people find their voices. On his first day of service, Mark mopped floors in the dining room while I was teaching a dozen ladies how to write a letter to their younger selves down the hall. I didn't see him. I didn't need to. But a friend told me he did a neat job with the mop, straight lines like a good lawn. The civil case rolled on quietly. Louise filed motions as neatly as a seamstress pins a ham. We asked for damages equal to my legal fees, the cost of added home security, the replacement of my brake line, and a full inspection, credit monitoring for 3 years, and a small charitable contribution in my name to the Elder Legal Aid Clinic. She said, "It's not about the money." I said, "It's about the shape of things. He made a mess. He can help wash the dishes." Mid-October brought a chill and a letter. The civil case settled. No trial. The settlement agreement included a clause barring him from using my name, likeness, or identifying information for any purpose ever, in exchange for a no-trash talking pact I was happy to sign because I didn't intend to talk trash. I intended to talk truth. We added a payment plan for the damages and the charitable donation. It felt like sweeping a floor you thought would never get clean and finally seeing daylight in the corners. I would love to tell you that's where the story ends, but you know better. Life rarely closes a door without leaving a window cracked, and sometimes a bat flies in. 3 days after the settlement, an email appeared in my inbox from a reporter at the local paper asking for comment on a case of elder justice with an unusual twist. I did not respond. I forwarded it to Louise. She told the reporter no comment, which always reads like there's more, even when there isn't. The paper ran a careful, mostly accurate story based on public records. The comments section behaved itself for almost an hour. I cleaned my kitchen counters and considered the strange economy of public shame. Too expensive, even when you can afford it. So I didn't spend a cent. I left the computer closed and went to the senior center to prep my writing prompts. That's where the next twist found me. An elderly gentleman in a Vietnam cap raised his hand and asked, "Ma'am, how do you forgive someone who just as soon see you fail?" I took a breath. We weren't supposed to do therapy. We were supposed to set verbs on paper and let them hump. But words are doors. Forgiveness, I said, isn't a prize you give the other person. It's a fence you build so your goats don't wander into their yard. He grinned. "Goats, huh?"
"I'm a farm girl at heart," I said. "I know a thing or two about fences." He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. The final twist started as a text from an unknown number. "You don't know me, but I know your son." I stared at it and felt the old adrenaline try to climb my spine. I set the phone down and made tea. After a second text promising information you should have had, I forwarded it to Louise and the detective. We agreed on a time to meet at the station with the texter present, if the texter had the spine to show. He did. A thin man in a hoodie and nervous shoes introduced himself as a former business partner of Mark's. He had a lot to say about a startup that made more slideshows than products, a burn rate that was really a tab at the coffee shop, and a list of investors that included one man whose patience was measured in weeks, not months, and whose method of collecting debts kept the detective's eyebrows up. Most importantly, he had emails. In one, Mark wrote, "If I can get access to the house, the line, and the car, I can bridge a few months. Working angles now." He dated it 2 weeks before my brake line was cut. The DA didn't add charges based on that. He didn't need to. But the information explained a lot. It also included one final practical gift: the list of domains Mark had registered for his so-called company, which, as it turned out, included a variation on my name as a brand ambassador page. He'd never built it, thank God, but he'd parked it. Louise moved faster than a rumor. She filed a takedown, served notices, and within 48 hours, and a lot of legalese I won't bore you with, the domains were transferred out of his reach. We secured them under my own name with a registrar known for not playing games. I redirected the few that concerned me to a simple page. This domain is reserved. If you need to reach my first name, my last name, you probably already know how. Clean. No mess. By Thanksgiving, the turkey went in the oven and came out the way it always does. A little too dry, a little too loved. Linda came over with cranberries that stained our lips fuchsia and a joke about men who believe apron strings are leashes. We laughed like women do when the worst has already happened and the best is still worth cooking for. I set 3 places. One for me, one for Linda, one for the life I thought I had. I poured the gravy and didn't spill a drop. And for dessert, I plated the last slice of banana bread. I took a bite, and it tasted like a boundary kept. The first quiet after a storm doesn't sound like birds. It sounds like your own refrigerator humming and your heartbeat coming down from a jog you didn't train for. That's where I lived for a few weeks, between the hum and the thud, teaching my little Wednesday writing group at the senior center and relearning the shape of a day that belonged to me. On Wednesdays, I'd park, legally, perfectly, with enough room to open the door without dinging anyone, and walk in with a tote full of prompts. The ladies loved the postcard exercise. I'd say, write to the woman you were at 20. Tell her one thing she can stop worrying about. Diane always wrote about her hair. Etta wrote about the man she didn't marry and how thank God for that. I wrote, you can stop worrying that being stubborn will make you difficult. It will make you safe. The director, sweet thing with sensible shoes, kept our group on the far side of the building when Mark came in for his service hours. I never saw him. I never asked how he was doing with a mop. I didn't want to turn my writing hour into a surveillance operation. It's funny, I wanted accountability, but I didn't need proximity. Accountability works fine at a distance, like the sun. At home, I kept tightening my fences. I put a keyed lock on the garage door and switched out the side door deadbolt. I made a password list written in my own weird code, old teacher trick, and tucked it into the firebox. I swapped out my mailbox key. I set automatic deposits to a separate bank, just because a new bank feels like a clean notebook. Every change was small, almost petty, but a dozen small locks make a fortress if you shut them in the right order. Then a manila envelope landed in my mailbox that looked like it had been through a war. Return address, County Adult Protective Services. I hadn't called them. I hadn't needed them. Inside, 2 reports filed about me months earlier, both closed as unsubstantiated.
The accusations read like the DMV forms had been put in a blender with some tabloid headlines. There was a note. Follow up on anonymous inquiries. This copy provided pursuant to your request. I hadn't requested anything from APS. Louise raised an eyebrow when I brought her the packet. She said, someone must have asked on your behalf, or a clerk remembered your case and thought sunlight would help. Either way, these closeouts are useful. They show a pattern. Scatter the same claims across different desks and hope one sticks.
I held the paper and felt something like gratitude for bureaucracy. Imagine that. Those caseworkers, bless them, had written little bullet points in the margins. Neighbors report no concerns. Home well kept. Client-oriented ×3. I could see myself through their eyes. A woman in a navy blazer offering banana bread and a binder, not a damsel waiting for rescue. Linda stopped by that afternoon with a tub of chicken salad, and the kind of face you make when you're about to take a splinter out of a child's palm. You see this, she said, pointing to the APS date stamps. All 3 were filed the same week he called your insurance. That's not care, that's choreography. I added the APS packet to the binder. New tab, new label. Parallel moves. We were building not just a case, but a syllabus. Lesson. When people throw confetti and call it evidence, you broom it into piles and see what color sticks to your shoes. A few nights later, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of my own house being a house. Old wood sighing, plumbing clicking. I made tea and sat with the victim impact statement I'd been drafting for sentencing. The template the DA gave me was bare bones, how his actions affected my life, what I wanted the court to consider. I wrote it like a freshman argument paper. Claim, evidence, analysis. I left the adjectives on the cutting room floor. Your Honor, my son cut my brake line. He filed false complaints. He impersonated me. He attempted to open credit in my name. The result was not just fear, it was a logistical storm. Rides, appointments, hours on the phone, locks changed, passwords rekeyed, and the slow work of explaining to neighbors and friends, to myself, that I am not, in fact, unraveling. I ask that the sentence include conditions that repair what can be repaired and prevent a rerun. I put down the pen and went to the sink. The teacup clinked against the porcelain with a little bell sound that made me think of the clamp in its plastic bag, taped into the binder like a pinned moth. It's strange, the artifacts we gather. I have my husband's high school class ring in a dish. I have my son's 3rd grade pumpkin drawing on my fridge. And I have the clamp, proof that love without guardrails can break your bones. A day after I finished the draft, Tessa called again. I found something, she said, her voice steadier than before. Not more notebooks, something, I don't know, personal. She brought me a little ring box, the kind jewelers hand out when they haven't earned a velvet one yet. Inside, an engagement ring that looked like it had ambitions beyond its carat weight. And, tucked under the cotton, a pawn ticket dated 2 months before the break line. The ticket had his name and a note. Loan to retrieve ring, due by date. I felt the click of puzzle pieces. He pawned it and took a loan to get it back? I asked. She nodded. And his investor covered the second retrieval in exchange for equity in a company that mostly existed as a website with a placeholder. He told me he was leveraging assets. I think he was just digging holes. We gave the ticket to Louise and the detective. Neither of them were surprised. Not directly our case, but it paints motive in nice primary colors. The DA asked whether I wanted restitution to include my time. I laughed. If we start pricing the hours mothers spend cleaning up after their sons, you'll need a bigger calculator. We settled on legal costs, security changes, the brake repair, credit monitoring, and, my favorite line, reasonable expenses associated with victim education efforts. He asked what that meant. I said, "You'll see." And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. What it meant was this.
I filed a DBA, doing his business as, for something I jokingly called the Clamp Coalition. Don't picture a national organization with a headquarters and a tote bag. Picture a 3-ring binder, a simple website my neighbor's granddaughter helped me make, and a handout that teaches women like me the vocabulary of boundaries: revoke, restrict, verify, notarize. I trademarked the little logo, a sketch of a clamp holding a ribbon, because if my son had taught me anything, it was that locking names down matters. The first fundraiser was a bake sale in the church hall that sold more banana bread in one day than I'd baked in a decade. We sent the proceeds to the legal aid clinic that helps seniors with POAs and scams. The mechanic donated a gift certificate for a car care and coffee day. I brought donuts. The men came for the donuts and left, promising to lock their side doors.
That same week, a DMV investigator with a mustache that looked like it had read a lot of John Wayne novels called. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, sliding a file across to Louise and me in his cubicle. It showed 2 online attempts to request a duplicate title for my car, both flagged by their system because the signature didn't match my previous applications. The IP on one attempt led back to the same co-working space, the other, predictably, to a phone hotspot. "Our software caught it," he said, proud. "New thing we're testing." I shook his hand like he'd just personally saved my life. Maybe, in a way, he had. Death by 1,000 paper cuts is still death. There is a particular satisfaction in building a fence that others can see from the road. People stop pulling into your yard to help you pick your flowers when the fence has a latch and a sign that says, "I've got it." My fence included a P.O. box so nobody could reroute my mail, 2 friends on my in case of emergency list who were not related to me, and a stack of pre-addressed envelopes to every office that might need to hear the words, "No one is authorized to act for me." Sentencing day wore its somber suit and tie. The courtroom was cold enough to keep meat. I tucked my hands under my blazer and focused on Louise's shoulder seam so I wouldn't turn into a puddle. The judge looked like he'd slept on the bench. I mean that as a compliment. He carried the weight of the room like a man used to it. The DA summarized the plea, hard facts in a row. He didn't gild them. Good. Then he asked if I wanted to read my statement. I stood. My knees felt older than they'd ever felt, and my voice felt younger. I read my words. When I finished, I added one thing that wasn't on the page. "Your Honor, I ask that part of his probation includes structured service at the senior center and completion of an elder abuse awareness program. Not because I want him scrubbed clean by a syllabus, but because I want other men who think they know better than their mothers to sit in a classroom and hear words they can't outrun." The judge ordered the terms we'd negotiated. He added 2 I hadn't expected: a prohibition on filing any guardianship or power of attorney petitions on my behalf without express court permission for 10 years, and a requirement that any future contact with me, after the no-contact period, be mediated through a licensed family therapist. I didn't know that last condition existed. Apparently it does. Mark, for his part, read his apology like he could feel the paper burning his fingers. He said the word straight. He did not look up. I didn't care. Admissions on paper can't look away. On the courthouse steps, the mechanic tipped his cap and said, "My wife says if you ever want a tire rotation on the house, you come by." I told him no more freebies. "We pay our way around here," I said, and he grinned. I thought that would be the last time the courthouse figured in the story. I was wrong. A week later, a certified letter arrived from the state licensing board for guardianship attorneys. The slick kid with hair that didn't move had filed Mark's original guardianship petition pro bono to get his name in the paper. The letter said they'd opened an inquiry into whether his filings had included due diligence or if he'd acted without verifying the facts. I didn't initiate that. Someone else did. Sometimes the system notices on its own. Sometimes people who see smoke write it down. I kept going to my writing class and teaching nouns to stand up for themselves. We wrote apology letters from inanimate objects, "Dear ankle, I'm sorry about the heel, sincerely those shoes," and some of the ladies laughed so hard I worried we'd get kicked out. Laughter is a hinge that keeps a door opening. That's when the reporter called again. I didn't answer, but she left a message that made the small hairs on my arms stand up. I've been investigating a rash of anonymous complaints against older drivers, all in the same 3 zip codes, all with the same phrases.
One of your former students is on our staff. She said, ask Mrs. Holloway how to prove a pattern. If you're willing to talk off the record, we can protect names. I didn't want my life in the paper, but I did want the pattern to be named out loud because it wasn't just me. I asked Louise. We agreed to provide our binder outlines without my name, offering the bones of the scheme so other families could look and see themselves. The reporter did it right. No prurient detail, just the facts and the fixes. What to ask a DMV, what to ask your bank, how to revoke a POA in plain English. The story ran with a photo of 2 hands passing a clamp at a garage. The mechanic called me, choked up. That's my clamp, he said. She met a calendar with it. $10 for legal aid. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Then the letter arrived that knocked the wind out of me and filled my lungs back up all at once. Thick ivory envelope, bank name I knew like the back of my hand. Inside, notice of a dormant safe deposit box coming due for review. My husband had opened it 20 years ago after a cousin died without papers and left the whole family in a mess. We'd put our marriage certificate in there, his DD-2114, and some savings bonds we'd cashed long ago. I hadn't visited it since my hip surgery. Mark had to bring in the POA and showed the clerk, back when he was still the safe person to send on errands.
I called the bank and set an appointment. Louise came with me because she's smart enough to know old paper can be dynamite. The vault smelled like dust and metal and unsent letters. The clerk slid the box onto the little table and left us with a nod. I opened it and saw not much. The marriage certificate, yellowed at the edges, the DD-214, a postcard from our honeymoon that I must have tucked in as a joke, and one long envelope with my husband's handwriting I would know in a crowded hallway. 4M. Open if you ever feel cornered. My hands shook. Not because I'm old, because grief has a half-life you don't see on the chart. I sat down. Louise put a steadying hand on my shoulder. I opened the envelope. Inside, a letter, 2 notarized documents, and a photocopy of a page from our trust with my husband's neat marginalia. The letter was dated 10 years ago, after my hip surgery, but before Mark decided LinkedIn could stand in for a paycheck. M, it said, if you're reading this, something's gone sideways. There's a clause in the trust I didn't want to talk about when emotions were high, the decanting provision with a misconduct trigger. If our boy ever does something that meets the definition of financial exploitation, the trustee, you, then Louise's colleague Danner as successor, can move assets into a protective subtrust that pays for your care and charity and keeps him from inheriting until he's met X conditions. I hope the clause sleeps, but if it wakes up, don't let guilt talk louder than me. I love you. P.S. I left Danner a sealed memo. She knows. I felt the world tilt the way it did in the mechanics bay, except this time the tilt ended with me on my feet. Louise read the clause, her lawyer eyes going sharp. I know this provision, she said. They call it a morality or misconduct clause. It's rare. Your husband tucked in a clean one. It triggers on criminal pleas involving financial exploitation of the settler. That's you. I remembered my husband at the kitchen table with his reading glasses low on his nose, telling me we should write down the hard things when we didn't need them, so we'd have them when we did. I put my hand flat on the paper, like I was steadying it against wind. He thought of this, I said. He thought of me. Louise slid the second notarized page closer. This is the memo, she said, addressed to me. He asked me to keep it sealed unless needed. He left a copy here for you, which is unusual, but he always did like a bit of belt and suspenders. I read my husband's voice again. Louise, if M is sitting with you reading this, please help her implement the decanting if the trigger fits. She will want to be fair. Please remind her that fairness to herself is still fairness. The conditions I want for reinstating Mark's inheritance are simple. A year of sobriety, if that's part of it, I don't know. Completion of any sentence, full restitution, steady employment for 2 years, and a letter, not to me, I won't see it, but to her,
admitting what he did without blame. If he meets them, the subtrust can start paying him small stipends with guardrails. If not, he gets my watch and the pictures, which is what matters anyway. I laughed and cried at the same time, which at my age sounds a little like a hiccup. I said he put the watch line in to make me smile. It worked. Louise sat back and blew out a breath. "We can do this," she said. "The plea qualifies. The restitution and employment will be a matter of the probation file. The subtrust would put you beyond his reach. And the charity, what would you like it to be, is not him." I didn't even have to think. I said, "Scholarships for classroom aides who want to become teachers, the ones who do the quiet work with not enough pay, and a grant for the legal aid clinic, and—" I stopped, because something else was forming like a Polaroid picture, faint, then clearer. "A seed fund for the Clamp Coalition, if we can do that without turning it into a circus. No salaries, just printing, a hotline, maybe small grants for locksmiths and POA fees for folks who can't afford it." Louise smiled the way people smile when something good fits exactly where it should. Your husband would clap. He'd probably also ask for banana bread. We left the bank with the documents tucked into a new section of the binder I labeled Trust Thunderstorms. On the sidewalk, the cold air tasted like apples. I felt taller, which is a trick at my height. My husband had handed me the grown-up equivalent of a seatbelt, not a bar to hold someone else down, but a strap to keep me from flying through the windshield. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote 2 letters. One to my husband, which I read out loud to an empty chair, because this is what widows do when something finally makes sense. One to Louise, instructing her to begin the decanting process. I slept like a woman who had a plan signed by a ghost and a judge.
The next morning, I drove to the senior center with a prompt I hoped would do more than pass an hour. "Write," I said, "about the moment when a door you didn't know existed opened. Don't write about the door. Write about the light." Etta wrote about the day she realized her Social Security check was hers, not a gift from her late husband's brother. Diane wrote about the moment she told her sister she wouldn't be the family babysitter anymore. I wrote about a letter in a vault and the way the paper felt warm like a hand. After class, the director intercepted me with a whisper. "I need you to see something," she said, leading me to her office. On her computer was an email from an address that looked like a child had stepped on a keyboard. It referenced the senior center's insurance, asked snide questions about whether they vetted volunteers appropriately, and suggested they might be liable for the actions of participants. Underneath, a comment, deleted but not before she screenshotted it from the center's Facebook page. "Just because someone is old doesn't mean they're safe." No name, no photo, but the phrasing. Safety incident, liable. It was like smelling a cologne you once bought for someone and haven't touched since. I put a hand on the back of the director's chair to steady us both. "You're going to forward that to the detective," I said softly. "You're going to tell your board not to answer, and you're going to have the nicest fall festival this town has ever seen." She nodded like a child. "I hate this," she said. "We do good work. We shouldn't have to—" "I know," I said, "but we build fences, then we have pie." We sent the email along. The detective wrote back with the sort of calm that keeps people from buying torches. "Saved. Unsubtle. We'll add it to the file. Don't feed the troll." He put a squad car in the lot the day of the festival, just because presence sometimes says what words can't. 3 days later, Louise called. "The trustee petition is filed. We'll have a hearing in a month to formalize the decanting and the subtrust. We'll do it quietly. No fireworks. Just signatures." I said yes, and thank you. And I made a pot roast because signatures deserve potatoes. Weeks passed. Leaves fell. My mums held on like a good marriage. The mechanic stopped by with his wife to drop off a stack of car care and coffee flyers for our next coalition event. He looked at my driveway, at the little oil drip my old sedan leaves like a signature, and said, "I got you an early Christmas present." He popped the trunk and pulled out a bright orange wheel chalk.
He said, "You put this behind the tire when you're changing a flat. Belts and suspenders." I laughed. Everybody loves that phrase lately. Maybe that's the season we're in. The night before the trustee hearing, I got a text from a number I did recognize. Tessa. She said, "He asked me to ask you for a meeting. He knows about the trust. He says it isn't fair." I sat with that for a minute. Not the ask, the word, fair. I typed back, "Fair is me being safe." She replied, "He said you'd say that." Then, after a long pause, "I'm proud of you." Me too, I thought, and it felt odd and wonderful to think it without flinching. The hearing took 10 minutes. The judge read the clause, made sure I wasn't acting under duress, I nearly laughed, and signed the order. The trust sprang into being like a ghost finally getting a birth certificate. Louise slid me a copy. "Your husband," she said, "was the right kind of cautious." I went home and put the signed order in the binder under Trust Thunderstorms. I made a copy for the firebox and one for the P.O. box. Then I poured a small bourbon and sat at the table with all my tabs fanned out like a deck of cards. DMV, insurance, mechanic, APS, police, DA, civil, coalition, trust. I stared at the clamp in its plastic sleeve. I reached over and untaped it, felt the cool metal in my palm. My son cut a line thinking it would stop me. My husband wrote a line thinking it would save me. 2 lines, opposite directions. You better believe I know which one I'll carry forward. That's when I remembered something small and sharp. A key on my husband's key ring I never identified. Brass, short, with a notch like a bite taken out of a cookie. He'd labeled things with a label maker like a man trying to keep the universe filed. House, garage, shed, bank. This one had no label. After he died, I'd hung his keys on a hook by the pantry as if they were wind chimes. I took them down and turned that little mystery in my fingers. I tried it in the little jewelry box I keep spare buttons in. No. I tried it in the old floor safe built into the closet by the previous owner that I'd never used. No. I tried it in the cedar chest. Click. The lid lifted like a secret exhaling, and underneath the layer of quilts my grandmother pieced, there was a wooden tray I hadn't remembered seeing. Under the tray, a leather folder. Inside the folder, another letter in my husband's hand. And tucked into the flap, a photograph I didn't expect. I won't tell you what was in that letter yet. I won't tell you what the photograph showed. I will tell you this. When I set the picture on the table, I realized there was one more thread in this sweater I hadn't tugged yet. And when it came loose, it would unravel a story I thought I already knew. About the clamp, about the garage, about who first taught my son how to use a tool, and what he thought it was for. The letter folder smelled like old pennies and cedar. I slid the photograph out first, because pictures always tell their own truth. It was my garage, 20-some years ago. The pegboard neat as a hymn, coffee can of bolts on the bench, a paper calendar with a golden retriever doing something heroic. In the center, my husband, hair still more black than gray, on one knee beside our boy. Mark couldn't have been more than 12, skinny as a broom, cheeks smudged with honest dirt. In his hand, pinched between thumb and forefinger like a prize, was a little metal clamp, the same kind the mechanic slipped me at the bay. You could see it shining even in the cheap photo paper. On the pegboard behind them, in my husband's handwriting, a marker list. Fixes are for safety. No cutting corners. If you can't explain it, don't do it. Put the tools back where you found them. I felt my heart do that odd double beat it does when grief trips a wire you didn't know was still hot. Then the letter. M, he'd written, neat block print, all straight lines. If you're reading this, it means my belt and suspenders side won the argument, and you let it. Good. There's something I never told you all the way through because I didn't like who I was in the middle of it. Before Mark was born, we were tight on money after the factory cut hours. I did a dumb thing. I nicked a line on the old Chevy, thought I could get a fail at inspection, drag my feet on a repair, float a week. The shop caught it. Bill, the owner, gruff old saint, stood me in the bay and told me what I'd done in words that sent me home ashamed and clean. He handed me a clamp and said, "Tools save people. Don't use them to cheat." I kept that clamp on the pegboard to remind myself. Years later, when Mark wanted to learn cars, I told him the story as a cautionary tale. I can see myself now, maybe telling it like an adventure instead of a confession. If he ever uses knowledge I gave him for harm, know this. I taught him the skill, not the choice. You don't carry that on your back. The clamp's in the red coffee can if you need proof of what kind of man I tried to be after. He'd signed it the way he always did when he was trying to make me laugh. M, your reformed idiot, T. I sat with that letter a long time, not because it let my son off the hook, Lord, no, but because it put a light on a path I hadn't seen, back through a garage and a story told with the wrong kind of shine. My husband had been human. He'd done a wrong thing, and then a right thing, and then tried, clumsily, to make the wrong lesson into the right one. My son had taken a caution and turned it into a blueprint. I drove the photo over to the mechanic like I was delivering a baby. He took it carefully, like the edges might cut. He studied the pegboard, the clamp, the boy. I said, "My husband said a man named Bill read him the riot act once. That mean anything to you?" He smiled, small and wistful. "Bill taught half the county not to do stupid stuff with lions. He's the reason I put that clamp in your hand. You don't cut what keeps people alive." "Then we're in agreement," I said, "and now I know where the clamp came from." He tapped the picture. "You keep that list on your wall." He nodded at the rolls. "Folks need to see it." I made a copy and stuck it to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a jar of jam. Rules for a life, right there between the peach cobbler recipe and the phone number for the plumber who hums. I forwarded the letter, not the part that called my husband a reformed idiot, that was mine, to Louise, and via her to the therapist the court had named for any future contact. I wrote, "When it's time, I want him to hear this, all of it, not to excuse him, to remove his best excuse." I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. While I was at the copier, life kept doing the relentless, ordinary things that make it livable. I taught my Wednesday writers a lesson about verbs. If your sentence can walk without a cane, you've got enough. And Diane brought her oat bars, and Etta wore earrings shaped like little pencils. We didn't talk about break lines. We talked about skirts and gratitude and how men in their 70s suddenly start driving like there's a pie cooling 2 towns over. The reporter's piece about DMV complaint patterns ran, and bless her editor, it came with a sidebar checklist. Louise called it PSA, but make it legal. Within a week, the senior center had a stack of printouts by the sign-in sheet, right next to the daily cribbage scores. An old man with a grin like a fox told me, "I called my daughter and told her I love her, and also if she ever calls my doctor without telling me, I'll change my will." Progress comes in flavors.
Of course, not everybody loves sunlight. A letter arrived, no return address, typed like a ransom note, but cheaper, accusing me of publicly humiliating my son and milking the system for attention. It used the word harridan, a word that hasn't seen daylight since corsets. I laughed out loud. Then I put it in a plastic sleeve and tabbed it, "Noise. You can file hate too. It goes behind the useful things and takes up very little room." The investor, who'd been sniffing around Mark's life, tried to send a demand to the paper, and when they ignored him, he lobbed a clumsy threat our way. Louise filed a short, beautiful anti-slap motion. That's the one that turns lawsuits meant to scare you into boomerangs. And the court granted it so fast I almost felt bad. He paid our fees. I bought cookies for the legal aid clinic with the first check and attached a note, "Courtesy of men who underestimate women with binders." Meanwhile, the subtrust paperwork moved like a good river. Steady, quiet, wearing the rocks down. The trustee account opened, the old account slid like plates into a new cabinet that only I and Danner could unlock. My mortgage drafted from the subtrust instead of my old checking, just
because we could. If there's a sound associated with safety, it's the click of a key turning on purpose. Tessa showed up at my door one afternoon with a brown paper bag and a face that looked 10 years lighter. She said, "I brought scones. And news. I got a job. Real one. HR assistant at the hospital. They like people who can keep a secret that's actually a secret." We ate in my kitchen, and I told her about the letter and the photo. She cried for a second and then made a little fist. So, he grew up with 2 stories in one house, a man who learned and a boy who wouldn't. Something like that, I said. We don't get to pick which story somebody decides to repeat. She asked if I planned to show Mark the photo. I said yes. And the rules on the pegboard, I added. I want him to see the handwriting that isn't mine. The therapist reached out when the probation office signaled it was time to schedule a mediated meeting. Not contact exactly, but a structured, supervised hour where you sit in a room that smells like neutral fabric softener and say the things you kept in your pockets. I put the photograph and a copy of the letter in a clear plastic folder like a high school history project. On the day, I wore my navy blazer because I am nothing if not consistent. The therapist had soft eyes and shoes I've only ever seen on kindergarten teachers. She said, "We're here to set boundaries and share facts, not to litigate." Thank God, I had already done my litigating. Mark came in last with his court-appointed counselor and the heavy look of a man stacking excuses in his arms and trying not to drop any. He sat across from me and stared somewhere just past my shoulder like penance might be hiding there. I said, "I brought you something. It's not the clamp. You don't get to keep that. It's this." He looked down. For a second, just a second, his mouth softened. He said, "I remember." He let me hold it like it was a real tool. It was. It is. I slid the letter forward. I said, "He told you the story. You turned it into a stunt. He meant it as a warning." "That's not fair," he said, reflexively, like a hiccup. "Fair is me being safe," and the therapist nodded like she'd been waiting for the line. I said, "There's a clause in the trust. It's in effect. When you meet the conditions, finish your sentence, make restitution, stay employed 2 years, write an admission, stay sober if that's part of it, you'll get some of what your father meant you to have. If you don't, you'll get the pictures and his watch, which is what matters anyway." His face did a few little earthquakes. He wrote that?" he asked. I said, "He did. He wrote a lot of things we didn't have to use until we did. You don't have to like it. You just have to read it."
He put his hands under his thighs like a boy trying not to fidget. "I'm working," he said. "Warehouse. Nights." "Good," I said. "Honest work is honest work." "I'm going to meetings," he added, eyes flicking up and away. There wasn't, he stopped, started over. "I was drinking more than I said." I let that settle between us like dust. "Okay," I said. "Add that to your list of things you actually tell the truth about." He swallowed. "Do you hate me?" he asked. Suddenly 12 again, skinny as a broom with a smudge on his cheek. "I love you," I said. "And I am done being hurt by you." The therapist wrote something down with a little satisfied noise. I have to assume it was a star sticker in her own head. We ended with logistics, how he'd route restitution, how I would be notified of his service hours completed, what the process would be when, if he drafted the admission letter to meet the trust condition, no hugs, no scenes, a polite nod to the photograph as he left. I put it back in my folder and felt something unclench where my lungs live. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. The Clamp Coalition's second Car Care and Coffee Day was a small miracle of donuts and torque wrench demonstrations. The mechanic set up a little station with clear tubing and a mock brake line, and he let folks practice putting the clamp on in the right place for maintenance, not mischief. We printed the pegboard rules on a poster board and taped them up. People took selfies with them like it was a tourist attraction. An older gentleman in a veteran's cap pointed to rule number 2 and said, "Should have read that before my first marriage."
We added a booth called Paperwork Power with laminated checklists, how to revoke a POA, how to freeze your credit, what to say when a provider says, "Are you sure?" I handed out pens like party favors and lost count of how many times someone said, "I didn't know I could do that." Empowerment is a funny word until it's a piece of paper in your hand with your name on it and no one else's. The DMV investigator sent a quiet note that their new duplicate title safeguards were now permanent policy, and someone, I would bet my last slice of banana bread it was one of my former students, nicknamed the safeguards the Holloway rules in the internal memo. I didn't need the credit, but I smiled anyway. The civil settlement payments started arriving on schedule, each one an envelope with no personality. I took them to the bank and watched the teller's careful hands count, stamp, slide. I set up a separate ledger, the teacher in me will never die, and noted Mechanics Security Fund, Legal Aid Donation, Coalition Printing, locks and cameras. Money doesn't heal a cut break line, but it buys the camera that catches the next set of shaking hands. 2 weeks later, the reporter ran a follow-up, not about me, thank God, but about a new hotline the county launched for seniors to report suspicious safety complaints and provider impersonation. The detective had pushed it forward. He told the paper, "We're seeing patterns. We want folks to know they can call before it becomes a case." It included a photo of a hand, not mine, pinching a clamp over a piece of clear tubing. Tools save people. Don't use them to cheat. I thought we were done with surprises. The house felt even, like a shelf finally level. Then I remembered the other thing I'd found in the cedar chest under the tray, a second envelope tucked behind the folder, almost missed because the leather had gone soft. It had my name, and under it, in my husband's hand, "For later if you need the whole story." I took it to the table with a cup of coffee strong enough to argue back. Inside was a single page, a photocopy of a note he'd written to himself years ago with a date scrawled at the top and a header, "For M if necessary," as if the whole world was one long lesson plan. "M," he wrote, "I want to set down exactly what happened the day Bill found the nicked line. I took the car in and he spotted it before I finished my coffee. He brought me into the bay and said, 'Tell me what you cut and why.' I told him. He said, 'You don't touch brakes. You don't touch truth.' He made me fix it in front of him. He didn't call the cops because he believed I'd learned. I did. That night, I told Mark the story like a ghost story with a moral. This is how close your father came to becoming a small-time crook and how he didn't." Years later, when Mark was 17, he asked me, "Do you think I could have gotten away with it?" It scared me to see his eyes shine like that. I told him the answer doesn't matter because the question is wrong. If he ever uses a tool to take power from someone else, especially you look him in the eye and tell him his father said that's a line you don't cross and still call yourself my son.
I read that paragraph 3 times and felt something like a match strike behind my ribs. There it was, the whole story, not an excuse. A map, from a man's mistake to a lesson, to a boy who liked the part where the monster almost wins. I brought the note to the therapist's office and asked that it be placed in the file. "If he tries to make his father an alibi," I said, "I want the actual words on the record." The therapist nodded. "This is clear," she said. "It closes a door." I went home, and for the first time since the clamp hit my palm, I took it out of its plastic sleeve. I held it up to the kitchen light. It's a simple thing, a little bite of metal with a hinge, made to pinch and hold. I thought of all the ways a clamp is used: surgery, carpentry, cars. It doesn't create. It doesn't destroy. It holds what might leak and keeps it from killing you while you get the right fix in place. I put the clamp on the counter of important things, right next to the list of numbers and the bowl where I never can find my favorite pen. I looked at my pegboard rules on the fridge and underlined number 1 with a blue marker. Fixes are for safety. There's one last piece of this, and it's the part that made even Linda put her hand over her mouth and say, "Oh." It isn't about a court date or a bank form. It's about the photograph I almost didn't see, the corner of the frame where, if you squint, you can make out a second pair of hands in the shot. Not my husband's, not my son's. Hands I recognized from a different angle,
because I'd seen them pass me a clamp across a garage counter with a guilty tremor. I took the picture back to the mechanic and set it down. Without explanation. He blinked, then leaned in. His face did a slow, careful thing. "That's you," I said softly. "Isn't it?" He looked like a man weighing the cost of a truth. "Yes, ma'am," he asked at last. "That's me at 16. My Uncle Bill was letting me hang around the shop that summer. Your husband brought the boy by. We showed him how to bleed the line safely. He swallowed. "I remember telling him the clamp is for fixing, not for forcing." I breathed out. The room felt smaller and kinder. I said, "Then the lesson was there twice. We just have to make sure it's the only one that sticks now." He nodded like I'd given him absolution, which I hadn't. I'm not a priest. I'm a woman who survived. But I will tell you this. The world is smaller than you think, and mercy sometimes shows up wearing grease under its nails. There's still the ending to tell you. The part with the watch, the letter Mark finally wrote, and the one decision I made that surprised even me. But that's the final chapter, and I want you with me for every line of it. December came in smelling like wood smoke and cinnamon brooms from the grocery store. I lit the little ceramic house my husband bought me at a craft fair 20 years ago, the one with the tiny window that glows like someone remembered to come home. And I made my rounds, turn on the porch light, check the side door deadbolt, and pat the binder like a cat. The world was ordinary again, just with better locks. The mechanic dropped by one Saturday morning with a thermos of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon and a glossy print of the pegboard rules we'd taped up at Car Care and Coffee. He'd framed them with scrap maple he swore wasn't from a church pew. We hung them in my kitchen, right beside the calendar and the phone numbers list, and he told me Uncle Bill used to say he'd rather fix a dozen flat tires than one bent truth. "Tools save people," I said. "Don't use them to cheat," he finished, like a benediction, and we both smiled. The probation office did its quiet, bureaucratic thing. Forms in, checks out. Every 2 weeks, a little summary arrived via Louise. Hours logged, meetings attended, employment verified. Warehouse nights still, no violations. A note from the center director slipped under the official stuff. He mops in straight lines and takes his breaks outside. I pictured him on the concrete, hands jammed deep in his coat pockets, watching his breath ghost the air. Consequences are colder up close. I hadn't heard from him directly since our mediated hour. The no-contact order was a blanket I kept tucked under my chin, and I liked the way it warmed my spine. Then one Monday the therapist's office called and said, "A letter has arrived for you under the trust condition." The words pressed on my chest like a palm. The admission letter my husband's clause required, the one that couldn't say, "but." I drove over with my navy blazer buttoned like armor and my stomach doing small gymnastics. I read it in a quiet room with a chair that squeaked and a clock that didn't. He wrote it in that block print I taught him, the one that made every letter stand alone. I can't quote you all of it because a mother's heart is not a bulletin board, but this is the shape. I cut the break line. I made the complaints. I impersonated you. I tried to open credit. I told myself it was care. It was control. There were no explanations. There was one sentence that landed like a nail finally hammered flush. I did it because I wanted what you had, and I didn't want to wait for you to hand it to me. I looked up at the therapist, who waited the way nurses do when you're deciding if you're going to stand. I stood. "Please give him this," I said, handing over a small box wrapped in the Sunday comics. "Don't let him open it until he's alone." "What is it?" she asked, gentle. "My husband's watch," I said. "I thought I'd wait. I don't need to. The clause locks the money. The watch is just time." She blinked, surprised. I was surprised. I meant it and didn't flinch. But the watch was never about leverage. It was about love.
And love's not a tool you swing. It's a light you set down and walk away from with the path still lit. I went home and put the kettle on. The house felt both bigger and smaller without that watch tucked in the drawer. I took the clamp from the counter of important things and set it next to my mug. I liked the way the metal caught the light. I liked knowing I could pick it up with 2 fingers and feel the weight of a lesson without needing to swing it like a weapon. 2 days later, the county commissioner's assistant called to ask if I'd be willing to testify at a short hearing about elder exploitation and provider impersonation. She said, "Not about your case, about process, about checklists, about the Holloway rules." I rolled my eyes at the name, but then I said yes. The best revenge isn't a gavel, it's a handbook. I wore my blazer in pearls, of course, and carried a thinner binder because dignity is a kind of editing. I told them 5 things in 5 minutes. Require documented evidence for any mass of anonymous complaints that triggers a revocation. Weight patterns, trace IPs. Put pins in provider files that say, "Do not take instructions without the secret phrase." Make POA revocations as easy as POA creations, and make the process clear as a window. Track requests for duplicate titles like you track stolen bikes. It's not paranoia if it's policy. Print a 1-page sheet with phone numbers so people can tape it to their fridges and remember there are numbers besides 911. Committee members nodded. One asked, careful as a man defusing a bomb, whether the policy should account for family dynamics. I said, policy is the fence. Families are the goats. Build a good fence and stop asking goats to teach themselves boundaries. He laughed. Then he wrote it down. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Because here's the truth I hadn't said out loud yet. Not to you, not even to Linda over coffee that could dissolve a spoon. My husband's letter in the vault wasn't the only one he'd left. A week after the hearing, Danner, Louise's colleague and the successor trustee my husband had named, called me in and slid across the desk a plain envelope with my name and a single blue ink underline. She said, "He asked me to hold this until the subtrust was in place and the admission letter arrived. He must have trusted you to carry 2 weights at once." Inside, a half-page note in my husband's steady hand and a photocopy of the watch's back engraved inscription. It read, "M, if you're reading this, you've already done the hardest part, protected yourself from the person you love. Here's the second hardest part. At some point, you'll have to decide whether to hand him back something you can't take back. My watch. Time itself. I can't tell you what to do. I can tell you this. The watch keeps time, even if he doesn't. Give it to him when the truth is on paper, not before. Let him feel weight that isn't a chain. He'll either carry it or put it down. Either way, you'll have done your job. T." I laughed out loud in Danner's office and startled her Fern. "Already done," I said, and she patted her chest like she'd been holding her breath for 10 years. On the walk home, I realized I hadn't looked at the engraving in years. He'd had it etched for our 30th. "Fixes are for safety. T." There it was in photocopy, looping back through time like a boomerang that finally remembers where to land. The Clamp Coalition's hotline went live in January with a part-time retired dispatcher answering calls with the kind of voice that makes you give your real name even when you don't want to. We printed more handouts. We held a Bring Your Grandkids session where we taught teenagers how to say to receptionists, "My grandma is on the line with me, please address her." The teenagers rolled their eyes and did it anyway. Progress can look like an eye roll followed by a script spoken correctly. The mechanic and I, somehow I'd gotten used to calling him by his first name, which is Tom, co-taught a mini class called Know Your Car, Know Yourself. We showed people where the brake fluid reservoir lives, and we talked about what independence actually feels like at 70. Not reckless, precise. Tom made a joke about torque that made Linda spit her coffee, and I laughed the kind of laugh that loosens a rib. In February, an envelope arrived with no return address, and the ugliest stationery I've ever seen. Ornate border like a wedding invitation married to a tax form. Inside, a single photograph of my husband's watch face, hand set to 7:12, and a note. I'm keeping time. No signature, no plea, just that. I put it in a sleeve labeled Aftermath, Quiet, and I didn't show it to anyone but the therapist, who said that's a sentence without a verb. We both agreed we preferred letters with verbs. I kept teaching my Wednesday writers. I assigned a prompt called The Moment I Didn't Apologize for Existing, and the room hummed. Etta wrote about telling the cable guy to explain the bill out loud until it made sense. Diane wrote about asking her doctor to look at her, not her son, when she answered a question. I wrote about driving myself to the cemetery on a day when the wind was bossy and the sky was clear like a promise. On the way home from the cemetery, a call from the detective. We've closed the side investigation. Your son's investor is busy with tax trouble. No more creepy emails to the senior center. The reporters moved on to potholes. You're allowed to be boring now. I have never been boring, I said, and he laughed. But I'd take your point. March is a strange month for widows. The light comes back, and with it, the temptation to forgive the past, just because everything looks pretty again. That's when I found the last thing my husband had tucked away. A little business card in the bottom of his desk that said, Bill's Auto. You don't touch brakes, you don't touch truth. I taped it under the framed rules in my kitchen and sent Tom a picture. He sent back a thumbs up and then, after a pause, you coming by for your oil change, or are you going to keep flunking it on purpose so we can chat? Put me on the books, I texted. I've got donuts. Spring brought a call from the state DMV. Their internal memo about complaint patterns had bloomed into a formal policy. They asked if I'd lend my name to the rollout. I said the only name that belonged on the rule was Bill's, but I'd stand behind it with a plate of banana bread. They laughed and let me bring the bread. At the rollout, an older woman in a cherry red coat put her hand over mine on the table. She whispered, My son got in my head, told me I was a danger, took my keys. He started nice and ended mean. I thought I was losing my mind. Your handout gave me words. Words are the best tools. Use them until they fit your hand. She cried. I pressed a napkin into her palm. I keep napkins in my purse the way some people keep pepper spray. We all arm ourselves with what we can. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. Because the last play was mine. The no contact order had 6 months left. The trust conditions would take him longer, employment, sobriety, restitution, but the admission letter had moved one stone. I decided to move one of mine. I called the therapist and asked whether it would be appropriate to send a single page through her office, not to him directly, not to start a conversation, but to put a period at the end of a sentence that had been wobbling. She said, Write it, I'll decide if it fits the order. Keep it to 1 page, use verbs. I wrote, Mark, I read your letter. I see the verbs. I sent you your father's watch because time isn't leverage, it's a mercy. You'll either wear it or pawn it. That's your verb. The trust is locked because safety isn't a feeling, it's a fence. You'll either do the work or you won't. That's your verb too. Here are mine. I lived, I drove, I taught, I built, I laughed, I slept. I forgave. Forgiveness isn't a reunion, it's a boundary that lets me plant flowers without looking over my shoulder. If you meet the conditions, the trustee will know. Don't write me about it, write to yourself. Read your father's list out loud. Fixes are for safety. No cutting corners. If you can't explain it, don't do it.
Put the tools back where you found them. Mom.
The therapist approved it and sent it. I didn't wait for a reply. That's the thing about boundaries. They don't require applause. Summer came like someone cracked an egg on the sidewalk. The senior center installed new blinds. The coalition ran a locksmith voucher pilot. 30 seniors got new deadbolts and a lecture about not hiding keys under fake rocks because the rocks look faker than you think. Tom donated labor for 3 of the installs and pretended it wasn't a big deal. We gave him a certificate anyway, and he rolled his eyes and hung it by the shop coffee pot. The civil settlement finished paying out by August. We cut the check to legal aid and set up a small scholarship at the community college for classroom aides who want to finish their teaching degrees. We called it the Clamp and Chalk Fund and made a little bookmark with the pegboard rules on one side and use verbs on the other. If you told me a year earlier I'd be out here branding a revenge-adjacent literacy project, I'd have laughed you out of my kitchen. But here we are. Life, like grammar, loves a good conjunction. In September, I found myself standing in front of a room full of high school civics students because Mrs. Alvarez, God bless her, she still calls me Mrs. Holloway, like I didn't retire and start a second career in boundaries, asked if I'd talk about the difference between justice and vengeance. I told them justice is the earth under your feet. Vengeance is the itch in your palm. One holds you up, one sets you on fire. Guess which one lasts, I said. And a boy in the back whispered, "Dang," as if I just taught him a new chord. And then, quietly, the last twist unsnapped. The therapist called to let me know, within the limits of the order, that he'd brought her a photocopy of his admission letter, the one he'd filed for the trust condition, with a new paragraph added for himself. I did it because I wanted to be the man with the keys without earning them, it read. I'm learning that keys you steal never fit right. She didn't tell me that to make me feel better. She told me because therapists, like teachers, like to tuck a gold star in a file when they can. I hung up and went out to the garage and stood in the spot where the camera had caught his shaking hands. The concrete was just concrete again. The air was warm and grease-scented and boring as a church bulletin in July. I whispered, "Good," to nobody in particular, and meant it. On the anniversary of the day the mechanic put the clamp in my palm, we held a little potluck at the shop. Brownies from Etta, potato salad from Linda, deviled eggs from the pastor's wife who insists on sprinkling them with paprika like she's christening them. We stuck the framed rules on the wall permanently, right above the clipboard where Tom logs who's in the shop and when. I made a short toast. To Bill, who read people the riot act before the riot started. To Tom, who held the line. To husbands who put letters in vaults. To women who build fences and then invite people over for pie. To tools that save people and rules that keep us honest. And to time. May we keep it, not waste it, and never use it to hurt anyone we claim to love. We clinked paper cups and ate too much, and somebody started humming a tune I couldn't place until the chorus, and then I realized it was American Pie, and I laughed till my ribs of a certain age reminded me I'm not 20. I drove home at dusk, the sky bruised purple and gold, and parked straight as a sermon. I took the clamp off the counter and set it in the drawer with the measuring cups, because that felt right. Between teaspoons and tablespoons, a tool that measures how far I've come. I ran a finger along the engraving on the photocopy of the watch and put it with the letters in the firebox. On the fridge, the pegboard rules looked back at me, simple as scripture. Fixes are for safety, no cutting corners. If you can't explain it, don't do it. Put the tools back where you found them. I added a 5th rule in a different color, because retired English teachers can't leave well enough alone. Use verbs. Then I made myself a cup of tea and took it to the porch. The neighborhood did its evening things. Dogs, sprinklers, a kid practicing free throws and swearing softly when the ball kissed the rim and rolled away.
I thought about the woman I was a year ago, tiptoeing around a bus schedule and believing lies because they were wrapped in the word care. I thought about the woman I am now, who doesn't wait for permission to get in the car, who writes letters with verbs, who knows the difference between a clamp that saves a life and a hand that would cut it. People ask me if I talk to my son. The answer is, not now. Maybe not ever. Maybe someday, in a therapist's office with chairs that squeak and a clock that doesn't, he will hand me a letter that says, I did this and I won't again. And we'll see. I'm not holding my breath. I'm holding my life. The watch is ticking somewhere else. The time I get to spend is mine. If you're ready for your own fence building, I'll tell you what we told those teenagers at the coalition. Learn the words, practice the scripts, gather the people who will show up with coffee and pens. Teach your providers the secret phrase, and your family the difference between help and control. Then write your rules on your fridge in big letters and call them what they are. Love that doesn't lie. I'm 66 and stubborn, and I got my license back. I got my name back. I got my day back. And just between us, I kept the clamp. What would you have done in my place?
Your watch to the end. Click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.